The military hospital sat quiet under the pale glow of fluorescent lights, its sterile corridors echoing with the occasional footstep or distant beep of medical equipment. It was 3 in the morning when Sarah Mitchell pushed through the heavy doors of the intensive care unit, her worn sneakers squeaking softly against the polished floor. She had driven through the night from her small apartment to states away, answering a call that had come unexpectedly, urgently, pulling her from a life she had carefully rebuilt over the past 5 years. The night supervisor had been cryptic on the phone, mentioning only that a high-ranking military patient required specialized care and that Sarah's unique background made her the only suitable candidate. As she approached the nurse's station, clipboard in hand and exhaustion weighing on her shoulders, she had no idea that the next 48 hours would unravel everything she thought she had left behind and force her to confront the ghosts she had spent years trying to forget. Before we continue with Sarah's story, I want you to imagine something for a moment. Think about the people who have shaped your life. The moments that changed everything. The words that stayed with you long after they were spoken. Sometimes our past doesn't just fade away, it waits, patient and persistent, for the exact right moment to return. And when it does, it brings with it a chance at redemption we never knew we needed. Stay with me, because what happens next will remind you why some bonds can never truly be broken, and why the smallest acts of kindness can echo through time in ways we cannot predict. The charged nurse, a weathered woman named Patricia, with kind eyes and graying hair, pulled back in a tight bun, looked up from her computer screen and studied Sarah with an expression that mixed relief and apprehension. Patricia had been working at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center for nearly 30 years, and had seen every conceivable situation unfold within these walls. But this case was different. She gestured for Sarah to follow her down a dimly lit hallway, past rooms where wounded soldiers slept restlessly, their dreams haunted by battles fought in distant deserts and mountains. As they walked, Patricia explained the situation in hushed tones. Major General William Hayes had been evacuated from an undisclosed location in the Middle East 72 hours earlier, suffering from severe injuries sustained during what the military only described as a classified operation. The general had undergone emergency surgery and was now stable but still critical, his body fighting infection and his mind floating somewhere between consciousness and the dark void of trauma-induced sleep. But that was not the real problem. Patricia sighed, stopping outside a door marked with extra security protocols and a red biohazard warning. The problem was Titan. Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat at the name, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. Patricia continued, unaware of the sudden tension in Sarah's shoulders. Titan was a Belgian Malinois, a military working dog who had served alongside General Hayes for nearly 8 years. The dog had been with the general during the incident that nearly killed him and had refused to leave his side during the entire evacuation. When medical personnel tried to separate them upon arrival at the hospital, Titan had become aggressively protective, growling and snapping at anyone who approached. The dog had already bitten one orderly and lunged at 2 nurses. Hospital security wanted the animal removed, but General Hayes, during his brief moments of consciousness, had become so distressed at the suggestion that his vital signs had crashed twice. The medical team was at an impasse, unable to provide proper care with a 70-pound attack dog guarding the patient, yet unable to remove the dog without potentially killing the general. Sarah stood before the door, her hand hovering over the handle, her mind racing back through a year she had tried so hard to forget. She had spent 3 years as a combat medic attached to a special operations unit, had seen things that still woke her screaming. In the night had held dying men in her arms and whispered prayers she did not believe in as their blood soaked through her uniform. She had also been a dog handler, trained in tactical canine operations, paired with a German shepherd named Apollo who had saved her life more times than she could count. And then there was the incident. The one that had ended her military career and sent her spiraling into a darkness she had barely escaped. She had left that world behind, taken a job at a small civilian hospital, built a quiet life free from the chaos and violence. But now, standing outside this door, she felt the past rushing back like a tidal wave, threatening to pull her under. Patricia handed her a file folder thick with medical charts and incident reports. The general's vitals were stable but concerning: elevated heart rate, irregular breathing patterns, signs of sepsis that the antibiotics were only barely keeping at bay. He needed constant monitoring, needed his dressings changed, needed interventions that were impossible with Titan mounting guard like a furry sentinel of death. Sarah flipped through the pages, noting the medications, the surgical notes, the psychological evaluation that suggested the general was suffering from severe post-traumatic stress, in addition to his physical injuries. And then she saw it, clipped to the back of the folder, a photograph of General Hayes from before his deployment. He stood in full dress uniform, his chest decorated with ribbons and medals, his expression stern but kind, his eyes revealing a depth of experience and weariness that only those who had commanded men in battle could understand. Beside him sat Titan, alert and proud, his dark eyes intelligent and unwavering. Sarah closed the folder and took a deep breath. Sick new dogs knew how they bonded with their handlers, knew that Titan was not being aggressive out of meanness, but now his entire world had narrowed. The dog had watched his handler get hurt, had probably protect the general at all costs. Breaking through that protective instinct would require more than force or sedation. It would require trust, and trust was something that could not be rushed or faked. Patricia looked at her expectantly, hope flickering in her tired eyes. Sarah nodded slowly, accepting the challenge she had driven through the night to face. She would need to approach this carefully, methodically, drawing on skills she had not used in years and confronting memories she had worked hard to bury. She asked Patricia for 30 minutes alone. No interruptions. No security guards hovering nearby ready to intervene. Patricia hesitated, clearly worried about liability and safety, but something in Sarah's calm demeanor convinced her. She agreed, promising to monitor from the nurse's station and to come running if she heard any signs of distress. Sarah waited until Patricia had retreated down the hallway before she finally placed her hand on the door handle and turned it slowly, pushing the door open just a crack. The room beyond was dark, except for the soft glow of medical monitors casting blue and green shadows across the walls. She could hear the steady beep of a heart monitor, the whoosh of a ventilator that had been disconnected but left nearby, in case of emergency, and beneath it all a low rumbling growl that spoke of coiled tension and barely restrained violence. Sarah pushed the door open wider and stepped inside, moving with deliberate slowness, keeping her hands visible and her posture non-threatening. Her eyes adjusted to the dim light and she saw Titan lying on the floor beside the hospital bed, his muscular body pressed against the mattress, his head raised and alert, his lips pulled back to reveal white teeth that gleamed in the darkness. The dog's eyes locked onto her, tracking her every movement, calculating threat levels and distances. Sarah did not look directly at him, knowing that direct eye contact could be interpreted as a challenge. Instead, she focused on the figure in the bed. General Hayes lay motionless, his face pale and drawn, his breathing shallow but steady. Bandages covered his chest and left shoulder, and an IV line snaked from his arm to a bag of clear fluid hanging from a pole. He looked smaller than he did in his photograph, diminished by pain and injury, a warrior brought low. Sarah took another step into the room and Titan's growl intensified, his body tensing as if preparing to spring. She stopped immediately, standing perfectly still, and began to speak in a low, gentle voice. She spoke about Apollo, her own dog, describing his loyalty and courage, the way he had stood by her even when everything fell apart. She told Titan that she knew what it meant to love someone so much that you would fight the whole world to keep them safe. Time passed in a strange, suspended way. Minutes felt like hours as Sarah sat on the cold floor, talking to a dog who watched her with unwavering suspicion. She could feel the ache in her legs from the uncomfortable position, could feel exhaustion tugging at her consciousness, but she pushed it all aside and focused only on the connection she was trying to build. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Titan's growl began to fade. His ears, which had been pinned back against his head, started to relax. His body, coiled tight as a spring, began to settle. Sarah recognized the signs he was listening, processing, trying to decide if she was truly a threat or something else. She shifted tactics slightly, adding in what dog handlers called bridge language, specific phrases and tones that military working dogs were trained to recognize and respond to. She praised him for being a good boy, for doing his job so well, for protecting his handler like the warrior he was. Then she took a calculated risk. She reached slowly into her pocket and pulled out a small treat, something Patricia had provided from the list of approved foods the military veterinary team had sent over. Sarah tossed it gently toward Titan, not too close, not demanding anything. Just offering. The treat landed about 3 feet from the dog's nose and sat there, a tiny gesture of goodwill. Titan's eyes flicked down to the treat, then back to Sarah, then down again. His nose twitched, catching the scent. For a long moment, he did not move. Then, with agonizing slowness, he stretched his neck forward and snatched the treat, crunching it quickly before returning his gaze to Sarah. It was progress, small but significant. He had accepted something from her, had lowered his guard just enough to take what she offered. Sarah felt a flutter of hope in her chest, but kept her expression neutral, her movements still and calm. She continued to sit, continued to talk, and after another 20 minutes, she tossed another treat. This one slightly closer. Titan took it with less hesitation. The third treat landed just a few feet away, and Titan had to shift his position slightly to reach it. He glanced back at the general, as if checking to make sure his handler was still safe, then took the treat and returned to his post. Sarah saw the conflict in the dog's eyes, the desire for connection warring with the duty to protect. She understood that conflict intimately, had felt it herself 100 times. She knew that pushing too hard now would shatter the fragile trust they were building, so she simply sat, existing in the space with Titan, letting him adjust to her presence on his own terms. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only another 15 minutes, Sarah decided to test the boundaries a bit more. She stood slowly, telegraphing every movement, and took a single step toward the bed. Titan's body tensed immediately and a warning growl rumbled from his chest. Sarah stopped, raised her hands in a placating gesture, and took a step back. She tried again a few minutes later with the same result. But the third time, when she took that single step forward, Titan's growl was quieter, less certain. The fourth time, there was no growl at all, just watchful silence. Sarah continued this process, advancing and retreating, always respecting Titan's boundaries, always proving that she would listen to his warnings. It was a dance of trust, delicate and complex, and Sarah felt the old skills coming back to her like muscle memory. By the time Patricia peeked through the door window to check on her, Sarah had managed to position herself at the foot of the general's bed, still several feet from Titan, but closer than anyone else had gotten since. The dog had been allowed to stay. Patricia's eyes widened in surprise and relief. Sarah caught her eye and gave a small nod, a silent message that things were progressing, but that she needed more time. Patricia nodded back and disappeared from the window. Sarah turned her attention to the monitors displaying the general's vital signs. His heart rate was elevated, his blood pressure concerning. He needed his dressings changed within the next few hours, needed his catheter checked, needed a dozen small interventions that could mean the difference between recovery and decline. But none of that would be possible if Titan remained on high alert. Sarah began to talk to the general, even though he showed no signs of consciousness. She introduced herself, explained that she was there to help him heal, that she had experience with combat injuries and understood what he had been through. She told him about her own service, about the things she had seen and done, about the weight of command and the cost of leadership. As she spoke, something unexpected happened. Titan's ears perked forward, his attention sharpening. Sarah paused, watching the dog carefully. She repeated the general's name and rank, and Titan's tail gave a single, almost imperceptible wag. The dog was responding to the familiarity of military protocol, the structured language of the world he knew. Sarah felt understanding click into place, like a key, turning in a lock. She straightened her posture and adopted the crisp, clear tone she had used when reporting to superior officers. She addressed General Hayes formally, stating her name, ranked from her time in service, and her current medical credentials. She reported on his current condition using proper military terminology, detailing his status as if giving a briefing. Titan's entire demeanor shifted. The dog stood, his tail wagging more freely now, his expression changing from suspicion to something approaching recognition. He did not know Sarah specifically, but he knew the patterns, the rhythms, the language of the military. He understood that she belonged to the same tribe as his handler, that she spoke the same code. This was the breakthrough Sarah had been hoping for. She took another step closer, and Titan did not tense. Instead, he watched her with what looked almost like expectation. Sarah knew she was close to gaining full access, but she also knew there had to be something more, something specific that would convince Titan to fully accept her presence. Military working dogs were often trained with unique commands and code words known only to their handlers and a select few in their unit. These words served as identifiers, ways to ensure that only authorized personnel could give the dogs commands in the field. Without the right code word, Titan might tolerate her presence, but would never fully stand down. Sarah racked her brain, trying to remember the protocols from her own time as a handler. Different units used different systems, some based on military phonetic alphabet, some using operational calcines, some pulling from popular culture or inside jokes. She had no way of knowing what General Hayes's code word might be. She approached the bed slowly, now close enough to see the details of the General S. Faced the lines carved by years of stress and responsibility, the gray threading through his dark hair, the peaceful expression that belied the trauma his body had endured. Titan stood at attention beside the bed, no longer growling but still vigilant, still ready to intervene if Sarah made any move that seemed threatening. She reached out slowly toward the general's chart, which hung on a clipboard at the end of the bed. Titan watched, but did not react. Sarah picked up the chart and began reading more carefully, looking for any clue, any detail that might point her toward the code word. She found medical information, surgical notes, a brief personal history section. The general was 53 years old, had served for 31 years, had commanded units in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and locations that were redacted from the public record. He had a wife and 2 grown children. His home state was Virginia. His blood type was O positive. Nothing jumped out as obvious. Then Sarah noticed something in the personal effects inventory. Small list of items that had been on the generalist person when he was a vet. Wedding ring, dog tags, tactical watch, wallet, and a worn paperback book. The book title was listed, The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. Sarah felt a tingle of intuition. Hemingway was a favorite among military officers, a writer who understood struggle and endurance and the dignity of fighting against impossible odds. Could the code word be related to the book? She thought about the story, about Santiago and his battle with the great Marlin, about perseverance and sacrifice. She looked at Titan, at the general, and made a decision. She had to try something. She moved to the side of the bed, positioning herself where the general could see her if he opened his eyes, and where Titan could clearly observe her actions. She placed her hand gently on the bed rail and spoke clearly, testing her theory. She said the word Santiago. Titan's ears flicked, but he showed no other reaction. Wrong guess. Guess. Sarah tried again, running through references from the book. Marlin. Nothing. DiMaggio. The dog's head tilted slightly, but there was no recognition. Sarah felt frustration building, but pushed it down. She was missing something, thinking too literally, perhaps. She looked around the room, searching for inspiration, and her eyes landed on the American flag patch on Titan's tactical vest, still fastened around the dog's chest from the deployment. The vest was worn and dirty, marked with the stains of hard service. Sarah studied the vest more carefully and noticed something she had missed. Before, a small embroidered phrase on the side panel, barely visible in the dim light. She leaned closer, squinting to make out the words. Return with honor. It was the motto of the unit General Hayes commanded, words that embodied the values he had lived by throughout his career. Return with honor. Bring everyone home. Leave no one behind. Sarah felt certainty settle over her. She straightened, looked directly at Titan, and spoke with clear authority. Return with honor. The effect was instantaneous and profound. Titan's entire body relaxed. His tail began to wag enthusiastically, and he let out a soft whine of recognition and relief. He took 2 steps toward Sarah and sat, looking up at her expectantly, waiting for direction. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had done it. She had found the key that unlocked Titan's trust. She knelt down and extended her hand slowly, palm up, letting the dog sniff her. Titan's nose was wet and cold against her skin as he investigated her scent thoroughly. Then, apparently satisfied with what he found, he licked her hand once and leaned his head against her shoulder in a gesture of acceptance that made Sarah's throat tighten with emotion. She wrapped her arms around the big dog, feeling his solid warmth, feeling the rapid beat of his heart against her chest. She whispered to him that he had done so well, that he was the best boy, that his handler would be so proud of him. Titan's tail thumped against the floor and he pushed closer to her. seeking the comfort and reassurance he had been denied for the past 3 days. For several minutes, Sarah simply held him, providing the connection and security that all creatures need, especially in times of fear and uncertainty. She felt her own walls beginning to crack, felt the emotions she had locked away starting to surface. She had left the military broken, convinced that she had failed everyone who had depended on her. But here, in this moment, holding this dog who had guarded his handler with such fierce devotion, she felt something shift inside her. Maybe she had not lost all of who she used to be. Maybe there were still pieces worth salvaging. Eventually, Sarah pulled back and looked into Titan's eyes. She gave him a clear command in the proper tone and hand signal, telling him to lie down in a specific spot near the door location where he could still see the general, but would be out of the way for medical procedures. Titan obeyed immediately, trotting to the designated spot and settling down with his head on his paws, his eyes still watchful but no longer frantic. Sarah stood and approached the general's bedside without obstruction for the first time. She performed a quick assessment, checking his vital signs manually, examining the surgical dressings, evaluating his level of consciousness. Everything confirmed what the charts had told her. He was stable, but fighting. His body bore the marks of violence, shrapnel wounds, and burns that spoke of an explosion at close range. But he was alive, and that meant there was hope. As Sarah worked, changing his dressings with practiced efficiency, cleaning and redressing his wounds with the careful attention they required, she found herself talking to him again. She told him about Titan, about how brave and loyal his dog had been, about how hard Titan had fought to protect him. She told him that he could rest now, that he was safe, that people were taking care of him, and that he needed to focus all his energy on healing. She did not know if he could hear her, if her words penetrated whatever darkness he was floating in, but she said them anyway, because she knew that hearing was often the last sense to fade and the first to return. She had sat with enough dying soldiers to know that the sound of a friendly voice could be an anchor, a lifeline back to the world of the living. Hours passed as Sarah worked through the accumulated care tasks that had been impossible to complete with Titan on guard. She updated the general's medications, adjusted his 4 fluids, performed the dozen small interventions that would help his body fight off infection and begin the long process of recovery. As dawn began to break outside the window, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Sarah finally allowed herself to sit down in the chair beside the bed. She was exhausted, running on adrenaline and determination, but she felt more alive than she had in years. Titan had fallen into a light doze near the door, still alert enough to wake at any unusual sound, but finally able to rest after days of constant vigilance. The general's vital signs had stabilized slightly, his breathing a bit easier, his heart rate dropping into a more normal range. Sarah was reviewing the medication schedule when she heard a soft sound from the bed, a quiet groan that spoke of returning consciousness. She looked up quickly and saw the general's eyes flutter, fighting to open. She leaned forward, keeping her voice calm and reassuring. She told him where he was, told him he was safe, told him that Titan was with him. At the mention of the dog's name, the general's eyes finally opened, unfocused and confused at first, but gradually sharpening. He tried to speak, but his throat was too dry, his voice cracking on the words. Sarah helped him take small sips of water from a straw, supporting his head gently as he drank. His eyes searched the room frantically until they found Titan, and when he saw the dog sleeping peacefully nearby, his entire body seemed to relax. The general's gaze shifted to Sarah, taking in her face, trying to place her. She introduced herself again, explaining that she was his nurse and that she would be taking care of him. She kept her explanation simple, not mentioning the struggle with Titan or the long night of building trust. But the general was sharper than his condition suggested. His eyes narrowed slightly and he managed to croak out a single word. More breath than sound. How? Sarah understood what he was asking. How had she gotten past Titan when no one else could? She smiled gently and leaned closer, speaking just loud enough for him to hear. She told him that she had used his unit's motto, that she had spoken the words "return with honor," and that Titan had recognized them and stood down. The general's eyes widened and then filled with tears that he seemed unable to prevent. His hand, shaking and weak, reached up toward Sarah, and she took it gently, careful of the ivy line. He held a hand with what little strength he had and whispered a single word, broken and grateful. "Thank you." Sarah squeezed his hand back and told him that he did not need to thank her, that she was just doing her job. But the general shook his head slightly, a tear escaping down his weathered cheek. "I understood perhaps better than Sarah herself, what it had taken for her to break through to Titan, the skill and patience and understanding required. He whispered again, asking if she had served. Sarah nodded, acknowledging her past without elaborating. The general's expression shifted to something like recognition, the look of one veteran seeing another, understanding the shadows behind the eyes and the weight carried on the shoulders. Over the next few days, Sarah remained the general's primary nurse, working double shifts because she was the only one who could manage both the medical care and Titaness presence. She learned the general's story in fragments, pieces shared during brief moments of consciousness between long periods of sedated rest. He had been leading a rescue operation, extracting a team of special operators who had been trapped behind enemy lines. The mission had been successful, everyone accounted for. But on the way to the extraction point, their vehicle had hit an improvised explosive device. The general had taken the worst of the blast, shielding others with his own body. Titan had been thrown clear, but had immediately returned to drag the general away from the burning vehicle. The dog had stayed with him through the entire medevac, refusing to leave even when being loaded into helicopters and transport planes. Sarah also learned about the general's family. His wife had been cold and was flying in from Virginia, expected to arrive within the next 24 hours. His children, both serving in different branches of the military, were requesting emergency leave to come see their father. The general worried about them seeing him like this, broken and weak. But Sarah reassured him that they would just be grateful he was alive. She had seen enough families reunited in hospital rooms to know that love mattered more than pride. That presence mattered more than appearance. The general seemed to take comfort in her words, and Sarah found herself opening up to him in return, sharing small details about her own experiences, her own struggles with life after service. One evening, as Sarah was checking the general's vitals, and Titan was gnawing contentedly on a Kong toy stuffed with peanut butter, the general asked her the question she had been dreading. He wanted to know why she had left the military, why someone with her obvious skills and dedication had chosen civilian life. Sarah's hands stilled on the blood pressure cuff, and she felt her carefully maintained composure begin to crack. She considered deflecting, changing the subject, but something about the general's kind eyes and genuine interest made her want to be honest. She told him about Apollo, about her partner and best friend, the German shepherd who had saved her life repeatedly. She told him about the mission that had gone wrong, the ambush that had killed 3 members of her team and critically wounded 2 others. She told him how Apollo had charged into enemy fire to protect them, had taken bullets meant for Sarah, had bought them enough time for air support to arrive, but had paid for it with his life. Sarah's voice broke as she described holding Apollo as he died, feeling his blood soak into her uniform, watching the light fade from his eyes. She told the general how she had blamed herself, how she had replayed every decision 1,000 times, wondering if she could have done something different, something better. She told him how the guilt had consumed her, how she had started having panic attacks and nightmares, how she had finally accepted a medical discharge because she could not function anymore. She told him about the years she had spent trying to outrun her past, trying to build a new life, free from the memories and the pain. And she told him, voice barely above a whisper, that until she had walked into this room and seen Titan guarding him with the same fierce loyalty Apollo had shown her, she had not realized how much she missed it, the purpose, the connection, the feeling of being part of something bigger than herself. The general listened without interrupting, his expression compassionate and understanding. When Sarah finished speaking, wiping tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand, the general reached out and took her hand again. He told her something he had learned over 30 years of command, something he tried to share with every soldier who struggled with guilt and grief. He said that loyalty like Apollo-S and Titan-S was not about preventing all bad things from happening. It was about standing together in the face of those bad things, about refusing to abandon each other even when the cost was high. He said that Apollo had made his choice, had done exactly what he was trained and wanted to do, and that choice had saved lives. Honoring that sacrifice did not mean drowning in guilt. It meant living in a way that justified the gift Apollo had given her, the gift of survival, of a chance to continue making a difference. Sarah felt something break open inside her, a dam of grief and guilt that had held back 5 years of tears. She cried. Really cried, for the first time since leaving the military, and the general held her hand through it. This wounded warrior who barely had strength to stay conscious, offering comfort and understanding because he knew exactly what she was feeling. Titan, sensing the emotional shift in the room, patted over and rested his head on Sarah's knee, offering his own form of support. Sarah laughed through her tears. petting the dog who had started this entire journey, and felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. Maybe she could find her way back to herself. Maybe the broken pieces could be reassembled into something whole, something worthy of the sacrifices others had made for her. The general's wife arrived the next morning, a elegant woman in her early 50s with worry lines etched deep around her eyes. Her name was Catherine, and she swept into the room like a force of nature, immediately going to her husband's bedside and taking his hand with a tenderness that made Sarah's heart ache. Catherine thanked Sarah profusely for taking care of her husband, for getting past Titan's defenses, for giving the general the medical attention he desperately needed. Sarah demurred, insisting she was just doing her job, but Catherine would hear none of it. She had been briefed on the situation, knew that other medical staff had been unable to provide care, knew that Sarah had done something extraordinary. Over the following days, as the general slowly improved and began the long road to recovery, Sarah became part of the extended family that gathered around him. His daughter, a Marine Corps captain, arrived with her own stories of military working dogs and the bonds they formed. His son, an Army intelligence officer, brought news from the General S Unit and updates on the soldiers whose lives had been saved by the rescue mission. They all welcomed Sarah, recognizing her as one of their own, accepting her into the fold with the easy camaraderie that existed among those who had served. For Sarah, it felt like coming home to a family she had not known she was missing. Patricia, the charge nurse, approached Sarah one afternoon with a proposition. Walter Reed was looking to hire a specialized trauma nurse with both medical skills and experience handling military working dogs. The position would involve working with wounded soldiers and their canine partners, facilitating the reunification and recovery process. Patricia I had recommended Sarah for the role, and the hospital administration was interested in speaking with her. But Sarah was stunned, unsure how to respond. The thought of returning to military medicine, even in a civilian role, both terrified and excited her. It meant facing her past every single day. But it also meant turning her experiences into something meaningful, something that could help others. She decided to talk it over with General Hayes, who was now strong enough to sit up in bed and have longer conversations. The general encouraged her without hesitation. He told her that running from a past hadn't brought her peace, and maybe running toward it was the answer. He reminded her that she possessed a rare gift, a unique mix of skills and understanding that could make a profound difference in the lives of wounded warriors and their canine partners. He pointed out that Titan had trusted her when he trusted no one else, and that trust had saved the general's own life. How many other lives could she save if she just accepted this calling? His words hit home, cutting straight through her fear and doubt. Sarah asked for some time to think, to truly process what accepting this position would mean for her life. That night, she found herself in the hospital chapel, a small, quiet space lit by candles and softened by the colors of stained glass windows. She thought about Apollo, about the legacy of love and fierce loyalty he had left behind. She pictured all the soldiers and dogs she could help, the powerful bonds she could foster, and the healing she could support. She thought about the person she used to be and the person she had become, wondering if there was a way to finally bridge the two. And sometime in those quiet, pre-dawn hours, a sense of peace washed over her. She knew what she had to do. The next morning, Sarah found Patricia and accepted the position. She would start right away, continuing her work with General Hayes and Titan, while also training for the specific protocols of her new role. Patricia's face lit up with a huge smile, and she pulled Sarah into a warm hug, telling her how proud she was and how perfect Sarah was for this work. A nervous excitement fluttered in Sarah's chest, a feeling she hadn't felt in years. She was scared, no doubt about it. But for the first time in a long time, she was also ready. Ready to stop running. Ready to face her demons. Ready to honor Apollo's memory by helping others navigate the same difficult paths she had once struggled through all alone. General Hayes' recovery progressed steadily. He was moved from the ICU to a regular room, and then to a rehabilitation facility where he began working with physical therapists to regain his strength and mobility. Through it all, Titan never left his side. The dog's steady presence, a source of both comfort and motivation. Sarah visited them regularly, even after they were no longer her official patients. The bond they had formed went far beyond professional duty. The general had become a mentor and a friend, someone who understood her in a way few people could. And Titan, well, Titan had somehow managed to heal a part of Sarah's heart she thought was permanently broken. One Afternoon. About 6 weeks after that first night, CD spent on the floor speaking softly to a terrified dog. The general invited her for a walk around the hospital grounds. He moved slowly but steadily, using a cane for support, with Titan walking calmly at his side. They found a bench in a peaceful courtyard garden, surrounded by flowering plants and the gentle sound of a fountain. As the general sat down carefully, Titan settled at his feet. Sarah sat beside them, soaking in the warm sun and the simple joy of the moment. Then, the general turned to her and began to speak. He told her he had made a decision about his future. After 31 years of service, multiple deployments, and more combat than anyone should ever have to see, he was going to retire. Izingris, while healing well, had made it clear that he could no longer serve at the level required of a general officer. But more than that, he explained, he was simply ready to step back. He wanted to spend time with his wife and family, and find new ways to serve that didn't involve putting his life on the line. It was time, he said, to return with honor and pass the torch to the next generation. Sarah understood completely. She felt the weight and the rightness of his decision. She told him that whatever he chose to do next would be blessed by the same wisdom and compassion he brought to everything. The general smiled, and then he shared another decision. It was Donatin, tied into the hospital's new therapy dog program, a program that would use specially trained military working dogs to provide comfort and support to wounded warriors. Titan was getting older and aging out of active service anyway, and the general believed the dog's remaining years could be spent doing this important work, helping others the way he had helped his handler. But the general added with a twinkle in his eye, there was a condition. Titan's handler for this new role had to be someone the dog trusted completely, someone with medical skills and military experience, someone who understood both the warriors and the dogs. He was recommending Sarah for the position. Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes for the second time in this man's presence. The idea of working with Titan, of giving this brave dog a new purpose while he helped her continue her own healing journey, felt almost too perfect to be real. She asked if the general was sure, if he could really let Titan go after everything they had been through together. The general's expression grew serious and tender. He explained that letting Titan go wasn't about loving the dog any less. It was about loving him enough to give him what he truly needed, a sense of purpose, a deep connection, and the chance to continue serving. And knowing that Titan would be with Sarah, someone the general trusted implicitly, made the transition possible. It wasn't an ending, but a new beginning for them all. Thanks for watching. Sarah accepted, her heart full to bursting with gratitude and hope. She leaned over and hugged the general, this man who had shown her that redemption was possible, that the past did not have to define the future, that broken pieces could be reassembled into something beautiful and strong. The general hugged her back, and Titan, perhaps sensing the significance of the moment, stood and placed his head across both their laps, binding them together in a moment of perfect connection. Over the following months, Sarah stepped fully into her new role. She worked with wounded soldiers and their canine partners, using the code word return with honor as a guiding principle in everything she did. She helped facilitate reunifications, provided medical care, offered emotional support, and shared her own story when it could help others navigate their struggles. Titan became her partner in this work, the dog's calm presence and intuitive understanding helping countless warriors begin their healing journeys. Together, Sarah and Titan became a legendary team within the military medical community, known for their ability to reach even the most traumatized patients. General Hayes retired with full honors at a ceremony attended by hundreds of soldiers whose lives he had touched. Sarah and Titan were there, standing in the front row, witnesses to the next chapter of a good man's life. During his retirement speech, the general spoke about leadership and sacrifice, about the bonds between soldiers and the loyalty of the dogs who served beside them. And then he spoke about Sarah, not mentioning her by name, but telling the story of a nurse who had found her way back from darkness to light, who had remembered the code word that unlocked not just a dog's trust, but her own hardest healing. The audience did not know it was Sarah he spoke of, but she knew, and that was enough. Catherine Hayes invited Sarah to dinner at their home, several months later, a beautiful evening filled with good food, laughter, and the easy conversation of people who had been through trials together. As they sat on the back porch watching the sunset, Titan dozing at Sarah's feet, Catherine took Sarah's hand and thanked her again for saving her husband's life. Sarah started to protest, to insist she had only done her job, but Catherine shook her head firmly. She explained that she was not just talking about the medical care. Sarah thought about those words often in the years that followed. She thought about them when she helped a young soldier reconnect with his dog after a traumatic brain injury. She thought about them when she held the hand of a dying veteran and promised him that his service dog would be cared for. She thought about them when she woke from nightmares about Apollo and, instead of spiraling into guilt, felt gratitude for the gift he had given her. She had learned that healing was not a destination but a journey, not something achieved once and for all, but something chosen again and again, day after day. 5 years after that first night, when she had driven through darkness to answer an unexpected call, Sarah stood in the hospital courtyard, speaking to a group of new nurses being trained in military trauma care. Titan, now graying around the muzzle and moving more slowly but still sharp and devoted, sat beside her. She told them about the importance of understanding their patient's full context, about recognizing that wounds could be physical and psychological, about the power of connection and the necessity of patience. She told them about a general and his dog, about a code word that had changed everything, about the moment she had realized that her own brokenness could be a source of strength rather than shame. After the presentation, a young nurse approached Sarah as she introduced herself, and then, with tears in her eyes, shared that she was a veteran struggling with guilt over losses in her unit. She had left the military convinced she could never again work in a role that reminded her of what she had lost. But hearing Sarah's story had given her hope that maybe there was another path. Sarah took the young woman's hands and looked into her eyes with complete understanding. She told her what General Hayes had told her years ago, that honoring those we have lost does not mean burying ourselves in grief, but living in a way that justifies the gift of our survival. She told her that the road would not be easy, but that it was worth walking, and she promised that she would not have to walk it alone. As the young nurse walked away, looking lighter somehow, Sarah felt Titan leaned against her leg in the way he did when he sensed strong emotions. She reached down and scratched behind his ears. This beautiful dog, who had led her back to herself, who had reminded her that loyalty and love and purpose were still possible, even after devastating loss. She thought about Apollo and whispered a quiet thank you, as she did every day, for the sacrifice that had given her this second chance. She thought about General Hayes, now thriving in retirement and doing advocacy work for veterans' mental health. She thought about all the wounded warriors she had helped, all the dogs she had worked with, all the connections she had facilitated. And Sarah thought about code words, about the specific phrases and moments that unlocked doors we thought were permanently closed. Return with honor had been the key to Titan's trust, but it had also been the key to her own transformation. It had reminded her that honor was not about perfection or the absence of failure. It was about showing up, about doing your best with what you had, about refusing to abandon the people and principles that mattered most. It was about coming back from darkness, again and again, with whatever pieces of yourself you could carry, and trusting that those pieces were enough to build something meaningful. As the sun set over the hospital and the lights began to flicker on in the windows, Sarah headed inside for her evening rounds with Titan at her side. There would be more wounded warriors waiting, more stories to hear, more hearts to help heal, and she was ready, not because she had conquered her past, but because she had made peace with it. Not because she was unbroken, but because she had learned that broken things could still hold light. She had returned with honor, and in doing so, had discovered that the greatest battles were not always fought with weapons, but with compassion, patience, and the courage to let others see your scars. The hospital doors closed behind them, and Sarah and Titan disappeared into the building, ready to continue the work that had saved them both, the sacred work of healing. One connection at a time, one code word at a time, one act of faithful presence at a time. And somewhere in the Virginia countryside, General William Hayes sat on his porch with his wife, watching the same sunset, and smiled as he thought about the nurse and the dog who had taught him that coming home was not about returning to who you were before, but about embracing who you had become through the fire. The code word had unlocked more than a dog's trust. It had unlocked the possibility of redemption, the promise of purpose, and the power of choosing every single day to return with honor to the life that waited, patient and precious, on the other side of fear.